Alright, GladrapChannel here with Tommy Watt from T2T Boxing. He joins us all the way from Australia. It's a great honor to have you on the Skype call. How are you doing, Tommy?
Very well, thanks, mate. Very well. Thanks for having me on.
You know, it was kind of sad not to see you in Las Vegas covering the event.
Yeah, mate, sad to miss out, obviously. Do enjoy a fight week in Vegas, but it's a long way to go, and spent a fair bit of cash over in the UK when we were over for the Dillian White fight and the Anthony Joshua fight, so had to give this one a miss.
I know what you mean, but anyway, you know, Jeff Horn's reign as the WBO welterweight champion came to a crashing end at the hands of Terrence Crawford. You know, who he claimed the belt with a dominant display. How did you assess the fight, man?
Yeah, I think you sum it up well. It was dominant. I think Jeff was competitive throughout, which no one ever really questioned, I don't think, or no one on this side of the pond anyway. I think it shows the levels between Terrence Crawford and most of the division. I think Horn's competitive against most guys out there. Crawford is just one of those people that comes along once or twice in a generation that is just good enough to move through the weights with ease, and you know, he's doing that at the moment. I think we'll see him pick up a few belts at welterweight over the next year or so, and long may his reign continue. He's a good champion. He's obviously very impressive, and I don't think for Jeff to lose to someone like Crawford, there's absolutely no shame in that whatsoever. You know, he took a massive gamble in going over to the States and fighting one of the pound-for-pound number ones, and a lot of people expect him to come up a lot shorter than he did. I think he would say he was very competitive throughout. You know, he made his mark, and he showed he was no pushover, and you know, he'll obviously come again.
Did you think Crawford was sort of a class above Horn, like from start to finish? You know, did you see it that way?
Look, I think in the first few rounds, you know, it took him time to warm in, as a lot of these great fighters do. You know, Mayweather in particular springs to mind from recent years, that someone who took a while to warm into fights. You know, he knows how long a 12-round fight is, and he used the first few just to size him up, get his distance. And you know, for those few rounds, it looked competitive. But you feel like once he put his foot on the gas a bit, there was just a level between the two. But Crawford's looked like that with pretty much everyone he stepped in with, including people, you know, like Ricky Burns, Gamboa. You know, he's stepped in there with some world-class fighters and made them look very average. So there's, yeah, as I say, there's no shame in that for Jeff, but there was a level between them on the night.
You know, there was, you know, before leading up to the fight, a lot of people made issue about the weight. You know, Crawford was making his debut at welterweight limit. But it didn't really show, right? Like in this fight, like they both looked the same. Like Crawford looked quite strong. Like I thought Jeff was sort of going to impose his weight and sort of maul him, but didn't really see that. Yeah,
I think that was, you know, part of the game plan from Jeff's team as well, was obviously to use his physicality as he did against Pacquiao. Pacquiao, someone else who came up to welterweight, but I think Crawford himself is natural at that weight. His frame is big. You know, he's filling out well. You know, he fought most of the current welterweights in the amateurs, so he's been of that frame and fighting people of that frame for a long time, which is why he looks so comfortable in there. And you know, it's well documented that he really struggled to make weight in his, you know, particularly in his light welterweight days. So there's no surprise that he looked comfortable. I'm surprised how strong he was. You know, but stringy people are often very strong, and you know, he's got that deceptive strength that obviously I don't think Horn was ready for, and I don't think his team had a game plan for a strong Crawford on the inside.
What did you make of Horn's team? Like, if you hear them sort of in the corner, like they were sort of motivating him. They're like, "Yeah, you're doing really well." They didn't really give him that clear, concise, you know, information. Did you hear what the corners have to say?
I didn't hear much of it, but from what I've read a fair bit about it, and what I do know is that they would have gone in there with a definitive plan. So Glenn Rushton knows what he's doing, and he goes in there with a definitive roadmap of how a fight is going to go, and they would have had a plan B and C, but he does put a lot of faith in his plan A, and maybe that was potentially their undoing this time round. It's still this level. They've only really fought, say, a couple of fights at world title level, so it's a learning curve for everyone, Rushton included. Maybe there wasn't a plan B or a plan C that was strong enough. Maybe they were surprised by how many different angles and different options that Crawford showed. I don't think they were expecting him to be quite as tricky as he was, which, you could say is a bit of naivety. But there becomes a point where, their main aim was to keep him going. I think the one criticism you could maybe level at them really throughout the whole thing would be that they could have potentially pulled him out a little bit sooner than the fight was ended, really a round or so before. There's maybe an argument there. I wouldn't have personally, but I could see why people have been saying that. But at the end of the day, they know Jeff well, and they know his mentality, and he wouldn't have wanted to go out that way. So I'm glad they didn't. But it's hard to criticise a team that's taken him the whole way. Taking him from a kid to winning a world title. I think it's hard to say that they let him down or that he let them down. I think it was just they came up against a very, very, very good fighter.
Do you think they were sort of taken back by, Crawford switching up? Like, he started off orthodox and then he switched to southpaw. And he had quite a lot of success with southpaw. Do you think they were not just expecting that?
They should have if they've done, and I expect them to have done their homework. Obviously, they would have done. So I know the team personally, and I know that they would have been very prepared in terms of the game plan and knowing what to expect from Crawford. There's plenty of video footage on him, and it's well documented that he can fight very well. He's a fantastic switch hitter. It's hard to really pinpoint his best stance because he's that strong on both sides. Surprised me that he came out that way and fought southpaw for such a long time, but he was having a lot of success with it, so why not? So I don't think that really came down to it. I think they were just very surprised at the little differences in Terrence Crawford now and Manny Pacquiao a year ago. The little half inches, the little slips, the reading of the game, the distance, the timing of someone in his prime at that level is there's just only a few people that compete at that level.
Did you hear about the blisters? So sort of Glenn Rushton in a news article, it was revealed that the boxer forgot his training shoes in Australia, and as a result, Horn was forced to wear a new pair as he prepared for the fight. And the new shoes sort of created blisters on his feet. Have you read this article?
I haven't read that article. No, I hadn't seen any of that. Did that come out before or after?
No, it came out on the 17th of June, so afterwards. Let me read this bit out to you, okay? So he forgot his training shoes, so his dad went out and bought him a new pair of Nikes. But they just gave him horrendous blisters. 2 days before the fight, I was squeezing huge amounts of liquids out of these blisters on his feet just so that he could move, because he could hardly move for the last 4 or 5 days out here.
Well, that's obviously not ideal training, and could go away to explaining why he struggled to make weight if that is the case. I've seen other theories around that. I don't know. I think you shouldn't really be forgetting your boots at a fight for this stature, I guess, would be the obvious thing to say there.
This is what Bob Arum said. He said the Australian fighters conduct themselves different from our guys. Our guys would never, even if that was the case, they would never make an excuse like that, because with Federal Express, it would take a day to get the shoes sent over, and Horn was here for 10 days. And what? Is he walking up and suddenly getting blisters the night of the fight? He was training for 10 days here, and there weren't any blisters. Arum told Michael Woods of Everlast Talkbox podcast.
Yeah, I think there's a fair point there. Look, I don't know, it's hard to hear anything really coming out of this stage when, I don't think if he'd remembered his shoes, there would have been a huge difference in the result. and that's not to take anything away. Like I say, Jeff was competitive against one of the best fighters of this generation. So it's not to take anything away from him. It's just, I don't see that as too relevant. I think the more relevant questions are really where next for him. Like I say, he was competitive. He's shown that he's in exciting fights all the time. He's willing to go out and take risks. It's easy for a world champion, if you look at some of the current world champions and look at the fights they've had, to think that Jeff fought Terrence Crawford in his second defence. Says something about him. So I think, he deserves his shot. He gave Crawford his shot. I doubt very much he'll get a rematch. I don't think there's much call for it because of how definitive the fight was. But if he goes out and fights a couple of big names, maybe wins a world title somewhere else and comes back, then, or even just picks up a couple of good names, I think Crawford owes him a shot if he proves himself and gets a couple of big names under his belt.
Now, another question I had was with the 9th round. So if you go back to the Pacquiao fight, the 9th round was the most turbulent round of the entire fight. And I'm just saying, if they had the same referee, Robert Byrd, scoring that fight, he would have probably stopped the fight in Australia. And then again in the 9th round against Terrence Crawford, again, very, very rocky, very turbulent round, and it got stopped. So what? I mean, there's something common about the 9th round, right? Is that where sort of Jeff sort of loses energy? Do you see any similarities?
Oh, I think that's more just a coincidence more than anything else. I think as you get into the later rounds, that's when fights become very dangerous, because that's when tiredness sets in, and that's when other factors start to take their toll, and the cream rises to the top, as they say. So I think there's, say it's coincidental, but it's no coincidence it's late in a fight, because I think that's when, very close fights start to stretch out a little bit. And that's, I think, what we saw. Jeff was able to use his strength and his will and determination to get through a lot of the earlier rounds where there was a gulf in class, but he managed to keep it competitive through tactics and what he was doing in his roughhousing and his boxing. He was boxing well, particularly early on, but so as it gets later, it's very tough to chase someone like Terrence Crawford around, and that started to tell. And then that was when obviously Crawford was able to put his foot on the gas.
But do you think that Robert Byrd stopped it a little bit too early? Like, because he didn't knock him to the ground. Like he just jumped in. Was that a little early, like a tad bit early? I know you mentioned that the corner should have stopped it a round or two before. But
yeah, but I think it's it's different when you're there and when you're watching it on TV and you see a lot of different things. And I think there was a couple of shots in the round before, and I think he was probably waiting for an opportunity. And I think he'd made his mind up that probably the fight was there was a big gulf, and he'd already said in the corner that he had to show him something. I think in the round before they had to show him something. So I think as soon as he saw him go back on the ropes, he saw his opportunity and jumped in. And Jeff doesn't have that concussive one-punch knockout power. Or he does, but I don't think he had. There was at no point did Crawford look rocked by anything that he threw in that fight. So I think it was, probably it was the right decision. Whether he could have waited and let Jeff take a few more punches is irrelevant, I think, and no one really wants to see that. I totally understand where a lot of people are coming from, but for Jeff, he's got a young family, and he's got to fight on again. He wants to earn money for his family to set them up, and like I say, he's had a big fight in America now, and he's got a chance to go and do that.
You don't want to see him fight Anthony Mundine, do you? Who wants to see?
Look, I think a lot of people in Australia would go up and watch that. It's a very domestic fight, so I don't even think it travels too far past New Zealand as far as TV revenue and interest from the media is concerned. But from Jeff's point of view, it's a big domestic name. Most fighters when they do suffer that first loss, they want to take a step back. And despite Mundine being a huge fight, that would be a step back from Crawford and from Pacquiao. So I can see why it's an attractive option. Mundine's not the strong young man he used to be. He's still a very crafty fighter, but I don't think he's the threat to the division that he once was, particularly down at welterweight. It's going to be tough for him to get down there. So I'm not sure. I think Dean Lonergan said that he doesn't want the fight. I've heard from some bits and pieces on Twitter coming out from the camp that Glenn said that Glenn Rushton said he'd be keen for it. So who knows? At the end of the day, money talks, and Mundine is a big money name, or certainly always has been here in Australia. So who knows? Who knows? I'd be there if it happened. So.
Another thing I want to talk about is Jeff Horn has been getting a lot of hate, man. Like, tremendous amount of hate. Like, I think people are just upset that the Manny Pacquiao fight. You know, many people don't think he won that fight, and now they sort of it's almost like a redemption to them that Terrence Crawford beat Horn. Like they find this as redeeming in a way. Like they're sort of happy to see. Like, you know, Jeff is a great guy. You know, he's a humble champion. You know, I've interviewed him for many years. Why are people seeing him in such a negative light? Are you able to understand the hostility?
It's a hard one to pick. I think a lot of it stems from the media coverage of that fight, particularly the American media coverage. And it's been, you know, well documented what Teddy Atlas has said and has doubled down on since. And, you know, I think it's shown a bit of lack of class in the way he's conducted himself around that. At the end of the day, Jeff won that fight. There's been much more controversial decisions that have garnered far less attention and criticism. And it's just the case that he wasn't expected to win that fight. It wasn't in the script. No one wanted him to win that fight in terms of the powers that be. And then outside of Australia, really, no one really wanted him to win that fight, because for boxing, they've had to wait 2 years or a year for Terrence Crawford to get his name on that belt, and for Pacquiao Crawford to be a fight. That fight was meant to have gone and done by now. So Horn got in the way of that. And then, you know, you've got the diehard Pacquiao fans and just straight up haters that are just never going to be on the bandwagon anyway. So, you know, at the end of the day, there's some people you're never going to be able to please.
But it's not Jeff Horn's fault, right? I mean, you know, there's the judges are there. Like why are they taking it out on him? Like, I don't get it. Like,
oh, I think if you spend 10 minutes on Twitter, you'll see that the boxing community is a highly critical environment. And yeah, there's a lot more criticism and hate out there than there is love and admiration. Certainly vocally there is.
Because for Jeff, I think he saw this fight as a way for him to redeem himself. Like he said, like, people are viewing me as a fraud of the welterweight division because of the Pacquiao fight. But I think he saw this fight with Terrence as a way just to stop the hate, you know. But now it's back on. Like,
yeah, no, I think
it must be hard.
That's always going to be there, and that was definitely, like I say, he mentioned it a few times in the lead up to the fight, and that seemed like his motivation for it. I think there's still, particularly in the American media, this perception that you have to go and conquer America before you can really be considered a world champion. At welterweight, there maybe is that claim that could be said at the moment, just because of the depth of division in America. But certainly, I don't think there was any reason to not give Jeff his credit. He beat Pacquiao, whether it be at home soil or not. And I think he should have got his credit. And I understand why people maybe didn't want to give it to him. But I think he should be given credit for the fact he even took the Crawford fight.
Because Timothy Bradley went through the same thing, but he got a rematch with Pacquiao, right? And then he was able to, calm the hate down, right? Like, he lost the rematch, and then people forgave him. But with Horn, he never got that opportunity to get that rematch. So he's just continuously getting hate flooded his way. Like, it must. Yeah,
but let's not compare Bradley's win over Pacquiao to Horn's.
Good point.
Vast differences in the gaps in the scoring there. So who knows? And that's another reason that Pacquiao fans are slightly touchy on the subject of scoring and always think that there's someone against them, is that they've been on the end of some fairly dodgy ones. Also been on the end of some fairly favourable ones as well, but they don't get quite as upset about those.
Yeah, because the thing is, I know Pacquiao came to Australia as the champion, but once you're fighting in someone else's backyard, then it sort of reverses. It's like Pacquiao had to fight like as if he was the contender, right? You know, when you fight in someone else's backyard, like
I think he just took the fight lightly at the end of the
yeah,
day, and
yeah.
and it cost him. You know, he came thinking it was going to steamroll Jeff, and that Jeff was just here for a big payday and was going to, fall under the lights. And say it didn't happen. And by the time Manny realised it, it was too late. And that was it.
So, I guess another one is, so Terrence Crawford, like he made the Horn fight look, like there's levels. How come Pacquiao wasn't able to destroy Horn quite as easily? Like,
I think no matter how good you are, you can't just turn it on like a switch. If you go through the whole of camp thinking you're going to win a fight easy, then you train easy. And your mentality is not something you can just switch on in the fight like a switch. You have to train that and focus that. And if you get into the 6th round of a fight and realise how competitive it is, that's just too late. You needed to realise that 6-8 weeks earlier. So the difference is Crawford is a consummate professional. He's still young and hungry. He's still coming up in weight in the divisions and still making his name, whereas Pacquiao was already a legend and perhaps not as hungry anymore. And I think that was really the difference, particularly when it came to those later rounds.
So how would, like, I know they mentioned Anthony Mundine, but why not put him in the ring with like Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, Kell Brook, Sean Porter, Amir Khan, Jesse Vargas? Why are these names not mentioned? Why is Mundine's name brought up? I mean, no
It comes down to
Mundine.
it really comes down to a case of risk reward for everyone involved. So from the Horn camp, they're looking at Mundine as a fairly low risk, quite high reward fight. They'll get more for that fight than they probably would against a Garcia or a Thurman or anyone in the division, really, a Porter or someone like that. And then from the other fighter's point of view, if you were holding a belt in America, if you were Errol Spence or if you were Keith Thurman, well, not Thurman now right now, but if you were holding a belt or you were waiting in a line for a mandatory shot, Jeff Horn isn't someone you'd want to fight. He's a tough guy, very strong welterweight. He's shown that he'll be competitive throughout and he won't give up. And that's not a fight people want to take as a voluntary or unless they have to, particularly if his name's not Manny Pacquiao or if his name's not Floyd Mayweather. People don't want to take a non-title fight where there's not a huge gain in it for them unless it's a huge name. And Jeff, albeit that he's a former world champion, isn't quite that name. So it's going to be hard for him. The decision they've got to make now is if they immediately want to chase another belt and maybe not take as much money and maybe force their way back into shape with a mandatory, or take the Mundine fight, get a bit of money, see where the dust settles in the division over the next few months, and maybe then pick up a big name.
So how is Horn's name, like how is Horn viewed in Australia? Does he have a big following there?
So I think in Australia, yes. In general, yes. In Queensland, definitely yes. He's a superstar in Queensland. Australia's a huge place, and their sports are quite disjointed between the states. It's they're very tribal in who they support. So everyone in Queensland is behind Horn. It's taken everyone else a little bit longer to get behind him, but definitely when the fight was on, everyone was talking about it. It clashed with the UFC fight, obviously, which was a contentious issue throughout the build-up. But yeah, definitely, it was talked about a lot, and throughout the state of origin and everything else that was going on during the rugby league, Horn was being mentioned throughout the commentary. He's definitely a household name here.
Dean Lonergan mentioned that possibly a rematch with Terrence Crawford would happen in Brisbane. And even Glenn Rushton sort of really wanted the rematch to be in Australia. He just thought the outcome would be different. Do you see it as different, or do you see it as a replay?
I don't think I see much of. I'd like to think that there could be a different outcome because obviously I like Jeff, but realistically, I don't really see right now an immediate rematch would be that much of a different outcome, unless the preparation was that bad. But even so, I think Crawford is just, as I say, one of these elite fighters, and it's been and from a personal standpoint, I'd rather see where he can go in the division in terms of the other fighters. And I'd like to see Jeff against some other fighters as well, with different styles, and maybe guys that will come and fight him a bit more, because we know he's keen. And if you get one of these guys like a Thurman or a Garcia that will come to fight, then that's going to be a great fight to watch.
What about a rematch with Pacquiao?
Is Pacquiao still fighting? I don't know.
Well, he's fighting Lucas Matisse, right? So.
Oh yeah, he does have the Matisse fight. Yeah. Yeah. Why not? A lot of money in it. A lot of interest. You know, Pacquiao's going to be 2 years older by the time that came around, I guess. So it's, we'd suspect it'd be probably an easier fight for Jeff again this time round, and he could bury those demons perhaps.
How was your reaction, by the way, watching the fight? Were you sort of in disbelief, or did you sort of expect that?
Look, I think that's what most people probably expected from the fight. I was obviously hoping for Jeff to win, and I thought I hoped that it could have been closer, and I thought there was definitely ways that it could have been closer, and I could see ways that the fight could play out that would maybe give him a chance. I knew that there wasn't the best chance of that happening, but I don't think there was a huge shock in the decision, really, when you look at what Crawford's done throughout his career.
So, I guess just to change subjects, how do you see the Parker and the Dillian White fight going? I know you saw I know you saw Dillian White, destroy Lucas Brown, and
let's.
Are you hoping
let's not
for
revisit
Parker?
that.
Yeah, are you hoping for Parker to do some revenge, or how do you see it going?
No, look, I don't look at it like that. Dylan was professional after the fight, and he did very well in that fight, and he was very impressive. So, credit to him. There's nothing about revenge in that. He's a very exciting fighter to watch. He's great in the division, and I think it's a great fight. I think hat off to both guys for taking it, because there seems very little for both of them to gain, really, other than a financial gain from this fight, but they've taken it on fairly short notice. And it's going to be an absolute belter. The card's looking great, and that both of those guys are going to come and fight, and it's going to be highly entertaining. So, yeah, can't wait. Really happy about it.
I guess just to compare them on paper, so they have sort of fought similar fighters. So, So I think they fought Brian Minto. So Dillian White beat him in the second round, I think. And Brian, you know what I mean? Like, so they fought similar opponents like Nascimento,
Joshua.
Joshua, then Irinu Costa Jr. So he's, just comparing their records, Dillian White has sort of beaten them much quicker than Parker. Does that imply anything, or is that, does that show you?
Not too much, especially really when you look at the different animal that Dillian White is in the last 18 months or so than he was pre-Joshua fight. The surgery and obviously the new regime that wherever he's on is doing something for him, because he's looking great. And he's looking very, very strong and very destructive. I think there's not too much to see other than the fact that they've both beaten the same opponents and lost to the same opponent. Dylan's fight with AJ was more entertaining. He had Joshua probably more rocked than Parker did, but Parker went 12 rounds, so very little to take from that as well. I don't know who I'd edge, really. I've been toing and froing on it. If I was going to put money on it, I'd maybe go for Joe, just because it's Joe. But I think otherwise it's a really, really tough fight to call. And so I'm really looking forward to watching it.
All right, Tommy, I think I've asked you probably every question that I could possibly think of.
Also, I just want to also give a shout out to another Aussie, Luke Jackson. Looks like he's going to be fighting over in Ireland. So very, very excited about that. I believe against Carl Frampton. That's about to be announced. that's certainly the rumours that are floating around. So if that fight does get made, that's an incredible opportunity for Luke. And very few people deserve a shot like that more than he does. He works very, very hard, and wishing him all the best for that. Just another Aussie that's pushing his way through to that world level.
How did Chris George do, by the way? He fought Josh.
He did, yes. Lost this weekend, unfortunately. But look, Chris is a real tough guy. He's very, again, he's competitive. I believe he injured his hand early on in the fight. But very competitive, and he'll come again. He's a real nice guy, Chris, and so I fully expect him to come back. And again, kudos for taking a fight like that.
What was the result of that fight? Like, he lost by...
I believe it was a 6th round. I think it was a 6th round knockout, I believe.
Wow.
Well, actually, it might have been points. No, I think it's points, actually. Sorry. I believe it was a points decision. But I know he injured his hand in the fight.
That just shows you how good Josh Kelly is, right?
Yeah, I think he troubled him. I didn't go up and watch it because it was on pretty early. But from what I've read, it seemed like he was difficult and tricky throughout. But Kelly looks like the real deal, but we'll yet to see. He's very young for a lot of praise to be thrown at him.
What about Liam Pryor? Do you know?
Liam Paro?
Yeah, sorry, Para. Yeah.
Yeah. He looks like he could be the real deal. Very exciting. He's a bit younger in his career, but I think he's looks great. Real nice kid. They're doing a real good job looking after him. And I know that he was over for Jeff's fight to watch that, and I'm sure that that no doubt will have given him the hunger to get a night of that on his own.
He also sparred in Mayweather's gym.
Yeah, I saw that on his Instagram, actually. He's a real nice kid, and I think very humble, very hungry, and that's what Aussies look for in their sports stars. And I think once he gets some regional titles and an Aussie title under his belt, which I actually think he's already got, then it's time for him to push on and start, make a name for himself. If he can get on some of these big shows, get on Fox, get on the TV, and we'll see the Aussies get behind him.
Yeah, and also hoping, Jeff Horn, hopefully this is just a minor setback for a major comeback, and, I'm sure he's going to get back on the top again.
Absolutely. We'll see Jeff back for sure. Like I say, everyone knows he's in exciting fights, and that's what the fans come to see, and hopefully someone will recognise that and he'll get a shot. All
right, Tommy, tell people where they can follow you.
If you want to follow me, Instagram or Twitter at T2TBoxing, or T2TBoxing.com or YouTube.com/T2TBoxing. And obviously, big shout out to yourself, Gladrap, for the work you're doing. And I'm sure we'll see each other very soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time, Tommy.
No worries. Cheers, mate.